Hola, amigos. About 4 years ago, I got a message from a designer in Colombia who said she'd like to work with Startup CPG to build her reputation in the US. I couldn't believe how affordable her pricing was, and the quality looked top-notch. I started work with them for Startup CPG and then a bunch of my other CPG projects as well. Fast forward to today, they are the most beloved agency in our Startup CPG community. They've got dozens of happy customers like Prickly and so many more. I recommend them to absolutely anybody who will listen because the combo of top-notch quality and very reasonable pricing is exactly what you want as a startup brand. You can hire them for branding, packaging, your website, or they actually have an awesome startup package that will do all three. If you want to learn more, email them at startupcpg@wagondesignstudio.com or check the show notes. You could also post on our Slack for feedback and just be overwhelmed by how many people want to sing their praises. Gracias, Wagon!
She was a pretty happy, active dog, but we were always very interested in feeding her the best we could. And so we made some prototype products. She's enjoyed eating the product for the last 4 years. Chief marketer or product development officer, whatever you want to call her. She's been involved in kind of trying and testing pretty much everything we've made. There was a lot of interesting opportunities in the pet space, and we had a willing product tester at hand, so it seemed like a logical thing to move into.
Hi everyone, Grace here, and I am back with another founder feature. This week I talked to Cam, the founder of Huntaway. Huntaway is a dog food brand that uses sustainably harvested wild venison in New Zealand as its primary ingredient. Cam has spent decades in the meat industry, but decided to make a pandemic pivot into dog food back in 2020 to better feed his beloved dog Darcy. Huntaway is doing some really exciting work around sustainability, and I think any founder seeking to create a more sustainable business will get a lot out of this episode. So I hope you listen, hope you enjoy, and as always, let me know what you think. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Startup CPG podcast. This is Grace, and today I am joined by Cam Mathias, the founder of Huntaway, which is a dog food brand that is on a mission to offer the most nutritious, convenient, and sustainable food for dogs. But Cam, I will let you introduce yourself and Huntaway to our listeners.
Thank you, Grace. Yeah, great to be with you. Big fan of the Startup CPG crowd and everything you guys do. Particularly enjoy these founder forums. So, great to meet you. And I'm Cam Mathias. I'm from New Zealand. I started Huntaway in 2020 at the beginning of COVID in the first lockdown. I was at home with my dog. Had access to a lot of venison, made some prototype products for her to try. She wasn't one of these sad stories that you hear of a dog that wasn't well, that needed some kind of medicinal remedy or anything like that. She was a pretty happy, active dog, but we were always very interested in feeding her the best we could. And so we made some prototype products, and then I had a buddy up in the East Bay area who was able to help with distributing those. And we started back end of 2020 with some trial deliveries up to California. And he was literally delivering those like an Uber driver, I guess, around the East Bay area, which I think some people found kind of surprising at that time when everyone was at home and locked down. But it got us off the ground, and some of those customers are still with us today, which is fantastic. As is my dog as well. She's enjoyed eating the product for the last 4 years. Chief marketer or product development officer, whatever you want to call her. She's been involved in kind of trying and testing pretty much everything we've made.
Oh, I love that. What's her name?
Darcy.
Darcy. What a cute name. Any relation to... Well, I guess she's a girl. I'm thinking of Mr. Darcy, like Pride and Prejudice.
That's a good guess, but actually she's named after Darcy Bustle, who was a prima ballerina in the UK. My wife and I used to live over there. And Darcy Bustle is her namesake. But she's 11 now and she's still going strong. So, yeah.
Wow, amazing. So one thing I wanted to ask about, because I think I read this somewhere online about you, is that you were coming from the meat industry. So could you talk a little bit about your background and then how that sort of led you into this adjacent but different industry?
Yeah. So I've worked in the meat industry for 30 years, and that included making value-added products for the likes of Aldi, Trader Joe's, Costco, in a variety of markets. Mm-hmm. So specialized in kind of product development and recipe development and things of that nature, and had some familiarity with the CPG space through that experience. And I'd probably exported to maybe 55, 60 different countries worldwide. So that gave me some good experience in terms of market access and logistics, moving product around the world, especially perishable product, that type of thing. So I lived and worked in the US in the meat business for a time in the 1990s, and lived up in Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. Had a great time up there, and never quite got over plaid and grunge from the 90s, as you can probably tell. I never moved on. But when COVID came, I don't think I'd be the only founder you've spoken to who had time on their hands, who time for reflection, and you think the next thing you do, especially at my age, I was just the other side of 50. And I was trying to think, I'd like the next thing I do to be meaningful and worthwhile and something I'm proud of, and my kids and my wife can be proud of. And so we had access to this great raw material that I had traded and worked with before, which was wild venison from New Zealand. And there was a lot of interesting opportunities in the pet space, and we had a willing product tester at hand. So it seemed like a logical thing to move into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that wild venison, because that's definitely something super unique to Huntaway that I've personally never heard of another brand doing. So could you speak a little bit about that sourcing you guys do?
Yeah, so at a nutritional level, venison is a novel protein, which is really beneficial for dogs, and a lot of vets will recommend novel proteins in the event of your dog having an allergy. And venison also has the benefit of, I guess, several hundred years of being regarded as the king's food in Europe, for example. So it's got quite a high image, a premium image, I guess, from people, and it's extremely lean, and it's very abundant in New Zealand. So deer were introduced here in the 19th century. They've thrived. They cause a lot of issues in terms of deforestation and distorting the growth of certain trees and things like that in New Zealand. So generally regarded as a pest, and as a result, our Department of Conservation is eager for hunters to control their numbers. And I was familiar with the edible portion of the deer, but of course there are a number of parts of a deer or any other animal that are more suited for a canine diet than a human diet. So at the beginning of COVID, deer, or the resulting venison that is derived from the deer, that took a real hit, because of course hospitality was on its knees, and the deer industry was struggling to survive in New Zealand. So we were able to work directly with hunters and primary processors to prepare the product that we were looking for in a human grade factory environment. I just want to stress that the raw materials themselves are not human grade, but the factory is, and we feel like that's a good compromise. I ethically have a few issues with the human grade pet claim. I think there's enough hungry people out there that we should be feeding the appropriate food to dogs, and reserving the human grade element for humans wherever they need it. But the other thing that we liked about wild venison was it occupied an interesting space at a time when plant-based products and lab-grown meat and other interesting concepts were coming to market, alternative proteins like cricket proteins and these types of things. And there's some fascinating products there, and the product development person in me finds all of that really interesting. But obviously, people do have strong opinions about some of those alternative sources and how sustainable they are, how nutritious they are in some cases, and there's a spectrum of answers there. But then you've got wild, and wild occupies this other space where you're also free from the criticism, rightly or wrongly, that's levelled at conventional agriculture, and even to some degree at regenerative agriculture, that over the long run it may not be good for the environment. Passionate regenerative advocates will convince you otherwise, but I think the most interesting claim, I think, is around wild, because those animals exist. So no one's calling them into being. They're not using resources or having additional resources like fertilizers and water and things like that, kind of, distorted turn towards their raising. They're already there, and actually they exist outside a lot of the assessment of greenhouse gas emissions and things like that. So yeah, we've thought that there was some really interesting claims, and at the core, a really healthy, a unique product. So, at the marketer part of me was really curious about what we could do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many interesting things in what you guys are doing at Huntaway. And one thing, just to say anecdotally, is my friend's dog recently, she discovered that he's allergic to chicken. And I was like, I didn't even know that a dog could be allergic to chicken. It just felt like so normal to eat, but turns out.
Yeah, allergies can take all sorts of interesting forms. And of course, this kind of fascinating period that we've lived in the last 5 years has been characterized not just by a pandemic, but a lot of our original customers in California, of course, were affected by forest fires and environmental issues. And those environmental issues led to other allergens and allergies and symptoms in their dogs, and caused their health to not be at its optimum. So yeah, it's coincided with all these interesting trends, people taking more interest in the nutrition of their dogs, and also taking with them their own experiences, this so-called humanization of pets, and people thinking, I have allergies, my kids have allergies, perhaps my pet has allergies. And look, I think sometimes those are really valid, and they can be in the form of a really extreme intolerance. We get some pretty obscure ones, and each time we reformulate the recipe to try and make it more, broadly appealing to people and their dogs, we get some surprising, response. Someone had a dog that was allergic to spinach, which I didn't realize, could be a thing. Allergic to shiitake mushrooms, and at some point you realize it's unlikely you're going to be able to make this kind of universal diet that every dog can eat. But also, if you can kind of point to every ingredient and justify why it's there, then you're going to feel a lot better about marketing that product to people. And this kind of privileged position that we have of when you're delivering to someone's home, and they are, hoping that this is going to maybe turn around the quality of life of their beloved dog. So it's a really privileged position to be in, and you do want to really do your best. I also have to say, from a product development perspective, designing products for dogs is really fascinating as well, because you have a whole lot of different criteria at play, in particular smell. So you want something that smells funky, but not so funky that it alienates the person who's paying the bill. You want the dog to be excited about it, and you want it to be in a form that's really palatable and nutritious. And then the elephant in the room when you're talking about raw dog food in particular is well, what does it look like the next day when you're out walking and you've got something to pick up? And so I know my wife found it hilarious that in the first year or two, these messages coming in from social media of, oh, my dog's stool has never looked better, and this kind of thing, and I would show them to her and say how proud I was, and she would be like, okay, you're really saving the world one dog turd at a time. So you get this really intimate relationship, and
totally.
and you get photos back, and here's the dog, and the dog's loving the food, and And that's really rewarding. And a lot of what we've done in iterating the product has come from feedback from customers. Hey, can you do this with the bag? Can you, consider putting this ingredient in and things like that? So we've got a really great bunch of customers, direct customers, and then we also sell on some of the marketplace platforms, Chewy and Amazon, and we're just about to launch with Tractor as well.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned not being able to meet every dog's allergens, though, because I was thinking exactly that when I was thinking of a question to ask you was, how do you balance, every single dog's dietary needs? And the truth is you do your best, but you can't do everything. But thinking of these different iterations you've done, and even the first iteration you've done, how did you approach developing this recipe for Huntaway's dog food? Because I know, you have obviously the wild venison, but then you also include some other elements. So could you talk a little bit about what that development process looked like?
Sure. Yeah, I probably put a little too much emphasis on new product development, and I think when you're starting out, it's really you're almost always doing the right thing. In hindsight, you might ask yourself, did I do them in the right sequence? And in our case, we put a lot of effort into broadening the range and introducing treats and chews and other things. And the kind of common theme when we were developing all the products was to aim for 3 unique selling points. And we felt that the raw material gave us one, and that we wanted to look at the packaging and the product form to kind of deliver some of the others. So we're looking for contract manufacturers that maybe have some unique process or a unique packing line where we can offer some differentiation there. And then constantly iterating the recipe, which at a financial level can be quite punishing because you're never really getting to that promised land where you're ordering packaging with sufficient economies of scale to really get the benefit from it. But you do see, just by following your instincts, you do see the uptake, and with direct to consumer anyway, you get a very quick indication or vindication of whether your decision was right. And we've gradually moved towards an all natural recipe, and there aren't many people in our space that can make that claim where they've got a complete diet for a dog that is not just using a kind of synthetic vitamin and mineral mix to even it out. And those synthetic vitamin and mineral mixes are not likely to do the dog any harm, but I think most of us feel better about natural ingredients wherever we can use them. And in our case, that's proved to be very popular. And we're really glad that we did that. It cost a little more, but we've ended up with a nice short ingredient declaration, and other than the odd dog with shiitake mushroom and spinach allergies, we've managed to keep a growing number of dogs happy with that. Yeah.
And so speaking of growing number of dogs, how have you worked on growing I know you have a subscription service and then a largely DTC presence, it sounds like. So how have you grown that service over these last few years you've been in business?
Yeah, so you talk to a wide number of founders, and I'm always a little suspicious if I hear a story that's kind of like relentless good news, upward trajectory the whole time. Of course, all of us have some trials and tribulations along the way, and in our case, the 3PL that we found in 2021, who were great, who just schooled us and got us up to speed with perishable logistics and set up all of our SOPs and pack outs and other things. They got bought in 22 by a big private equity owned cold storage operation, and they cleaned out all the nice business development people that we'd worked with, and we moved to a call center in Nebraska that we were dealing with, and no one on the shop floor anymore. And prices went up, and then it was, hey, we're getting rid of 25% of the smallest accounts, and you're one of them. So in the back end of 22, kind of tail end of COVID, when perishable logistics was still under a lot of pressure, there was everyone was still buying a lot at home, and a lot of those operators were really at capacity. I think I spoke to 45 different 3PLs, and that's where I started actually using some of the great resources with Startup CPG. There's a terrific list of 3PLs there if people haven't seen it, but worked my way through those, eventually found another good business, and also realized at that time that D2C on its own is a really hard road. You need the volume that you can get from some of these marketplaces. And so we started to lean into Amazon. We had a short experience with Petco, which we found a little difficult to distinguish ourselves and just kind of get our brand out in what I call a bit of a SKU fest. It's very hard to differentiate yourself against some of the biggest consumer brands in the world. But then after a time, you do start to see the benefit of being in other locations, the awareness that brings, and our post-purchase surveys show that people have seen the brand maybe in another setting first, maybe even bought it in another setting, and then come looking for us, which is really helpful. The other big challenge, of course, along the way, how do you acquire new customers, and that has ebbed and flowed a lot. Facebook is an ever-changing kind of challenge of, which way is the algorithm kind of trending at the moment, and what do they want to see from you, and what kind of creative should you be putting up. So we have found that works better for our dried products than for our raw frozen product. We still get a large number of new customers just from organic search, which we're really fortunate about, and then we can start to influence that through Google Ads as well. And we've also found a disproportionate number of customers coming from alternative search engines, and by that I mean people who maybe value their privacy, and that I find that fascinating. Yeah, that we get, because it is a thoughtful purchase. People do like to research it and answer their questions, and it's not uncommon for us to see that someone has maybe visited the website 15 times before making a purchase. That also probably tells me I need to maybe optimize some of our copy on the website a little better. But I think people do like to go and find out all they need and see some social proof and things like that before making what is, in our case, quite a big investment. Our average order value is a little under $200. So, that's quite an outlay for people. And, we want to make sure that they have all the information they need before making that purchase.
We'll be right back. Are you paying a ton in shipping to send out products, samples, and whatever else? The fees really add up, but lucky for you, we now have a partner that gets you access to the discounted shipping rates that are usually only available to those big companies. I worked with them for my last beverage brand, and I can tell you they definitely got us savings. Whether you're sending overnight samples, fulfilling e-commerce orders, or even a 40-foot ocean container, our partner, Enterprise Purchasing Group, or EPG, has got you covered. There are a bunch of free benefits you can get by signing up with them. You can get up to an 86% discount on small parcel shipments from UPS, DHL Express, UPS, and more. You get really competitive LTL and FTL rates through UPS. You get discounted spot and fixed ocean rates through Flexport and Maersk. You get exclusive air freights, and you also get preferential terms with supply chain financing. All you need to do is reach out to Francis Agas. His email is francis, Francis, at enterprisepurchasing.com. Mention the Startup CPG discount and take advantage of those savings. Good luck, everybody, and happy shipping. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking to the 3PL journey, I know that many, many other founders have had similar experiences. And so I think that people will resonate with that experience. And I know also just being in cold storage is just such another added hurdle to being a CPG brand. So one question that brings up for me is this idea, you're sourcing these products in New Zealand, and then you're sourcing the venison in New Zealand, then it's coming to America. How have you navigated, people who maybe are buying this product for sustainability reasons? How have you navigated making that, use case proposition, or saying, well, yeah, it's still worth it to bring it from New Zealand because it's still more sustainable, even though it's traveling this big way?
That's a great question. And so everything's sent by sea freight for a start, which from an emissions perspective is obviously better than air freight. There's some fascinating work being undertaken by the main shipping lines at the moment around operating their vessels slower to reduce emissions too, which I find really interesting. Transit times have definitely got longer. But we're sending from an efficiency perspective, the optimum form and volume of raw material over to Texas for manufacture. Mm-hmm. So as opposed to sending product manufactured in New Zealand, which created several issues. It created a trade cycle issue where, if you like, you've added all the value at the beginning, and then you're 60 to 90 days before that product is in the market and you're able to turn it to cash. Instead, we've sent the raw material, often it's twice as efficient in terms of container stowage, into Texas, and manufactured it with a really good contract manufacturer we found there, who has very high third-party audit standards and this kind of fascinating equipment that the product development guy and me was really interested in. So it enabled us to form a cube on a burger forming line. So a line that's normally forming burger patties for human consumption can form a cube or something close to a cube, which then gives us this really efficient stowage. So we can get a flat pack of cubes, and we can get to a point where we're 98% efficient on pallet coverage, and you're getting the absolute maximum quantity of raw material in a container, and then you're getting the absolute maximum quantity of product on a pallet to make that as efficient as possible and reduce the associated emissions with it. And then, it's looking at everything throughout the packaging to get that to the most sustainable level that we can. And the next big development we have is shifting all of our bags over to a single resin. And that's been a really interesting journey. We started out with some compostable packaging, which we thought was a great idea. But compostability is different in every jurisdiction. Even each county might have a different approach to it. And so it's very hard to guarantee that you're going to be able to get the right outcome. And if you deliver a compostable pack to a conventional landfill, trash facility, then it's not going to decompose. So single resin plastics have the highest likelihood of being recycled. But that's having that as one of our kind of founding principles is really helpful. I think ideas in our business, and I'm sure a number of the new businesses you talk to are not the problem. Being able to kind of funnel those ideas through a few kind of non-negotiables is really helpful in a way, because it actually sort of limits the number of options that you have sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you're bringing up about just even composting or compostable packaging, because I think that is sort of this huge trend. And I've even, I receive a bunch of products, and I've received some that come with like compostable insides or compostable X. And, I use a composting service here in Philly, and I do like to think I do these things right. But then, my composting facility didn't accept, some of these compostable materials. So it's like, or is it backyard compostable if somebody's using their, outdoor thing? So I think it's really admirable, and I really respect when brands are, making these choices and then also saying, oh, wait, we thought that was going to be the most sustainable choice, but turns out there's all these other complications, and so we're going to go another way. And I know it takes a lot of time and resources to do a pivot like that.
Yeah, without a doubt, and constant kind of assessment of it and using the product yourself. I think that's actually a big part of it. And just before you wonder if I have a shiny coat and a wet nose, I don't actually eat the product myself, but I'm obviously serving it to my dog regularly. And so you do get a chance to kind of live with the packaging and think, that Ziploc doesn't really work as well as I'd like. And and you realize that there's some false economies in packaging for sure, but it's a really interesting way to differentiate your product, and we know we can do better with ours, and it's just frustrating you can't quite iterate that as fast as you'd like to. You've got to finish using the last batch,
of course.
And I think that some of those claims that get made around sustainability and things like that, there's this concept of greenwashing. I think we all owe it to ourselves to kind of be really diligent about things like that, and if we think a claim is not legit, then we need to call it out. And similarly, making claims for the sake of it, and putting badges and things all over your packaging to to kind of call out half-hearted claims, it's a bit self-defeating. I think we're definitely moving to kind of taking some of those claims off pack and just simplifying it and stripping it down, letting our packaging kind of speak for itself.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I think packaging is this whole other realm of CPG that's so interesting, and there's so many elements that, as a person who's never founded a brand, I'm always amazed that there's another element to think about when I hear something. It's like so many components at once. But then as a consumer, you start to notice like, oh yeah, I don't like it when it's this way, or I don't like it that.
Or when you turn around and your garage is full of, Amazon Prime boxes or whatever it might be. And that's a really common theme I hear from people. I can't help but think that in 10 or 20 years, we will look back on our kind of addiction to cardboard cases now and think, really, we used to do it like that? There's a terrific system in Germany, which I don't think it's caught on anywhere else in the world, but they have this system called the Green Point, the Grünepunkt, where you can actually leave the packaging with the vendor, which I think that's a really interesting concept. If you go to a big box retailer, you can unpack everything into your car and leave all of the cases and the craft paper and everything, leave it all on the dock for the vendor to deal with. Wow. And that really kind of, pushes the problem back up the supply chain, which I find that a really interesting concept, but it hasn't caught on anywhere else.
Yeah. I mean, that would be very cool. And I do like that idea of, we do so much consumer blaming, and I feel like there could be some blaming of the upper. Yeah,
someone else took a shortcut to get you something that's overpackaged, just out of habit.
Exactly. Yeah. One question I was thinking about that I realized might be kind of stupid, but maybe I just don't know that much about dogs because I own cats. But do you I know you sell them in cubes. Do you freeze them and then take them out? How do you serve them?
Yeah. So they do require thawing. And so in my case, I would get 2 or 3 days worth out for my dog and just hold them in a special container in the refrigerator. So they're separate from everything else. But that does require a little planning. So you're always thinking one meal ahead. And then more recently, we brought out a FreezeDried product, and that offers some really interesting utility for the dog owner, because that you can take anywhere. It's really light. You've taken all of the liquid out of it through the freeze drying process. So you've got something that's a quarter of the weight of the frozen product that's very convenient and easy to serve. But that requires some rehydration. And I think it's finding the sweet spot. We want to be involved in making meals for our pets, not to the point that it's a drag and it's like making a whole separate meal. Some people will go to that length, and they might once a month prepare a big batch of food for their dog and then freeze it in smaller portions. And that's great. We get people using our food in conjunction with other things, and we get these incredible photos that look like Dutch old master paintings, where it's some Huntaway cubes with some Baltic sprats with a duck's head, and some they'll have all these elaborate things that they put together, and that's a whole Instagram kind of subculture of its own. But not all of us have that amount of time to spend on our dogs, so we want to spend just enough to know that we've been involved and we understand what they're eating and how it benefits them, but without having to create a whole separate kind of corner of the kitchen for them.
Right. Yes, that is important. But people love to spend time on their dogs, and I love dogs. I don't have one at the moment. But another thing I wanted to return to that you mentioned earlier was moving your production to Texas. Because I have spoken to a few other founders who have said they're considering moving their production or they're in the process of it. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about what the actual process looked like of having to find a facility here in the States.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Setting it up.
So we did most of our research online, and obviously for the longest time I couldn't actually visit our chosen market.
Right.
Part of that checklist of kind of why the USA was, it's the biggest pet food market in the world, and it's sort of like the Sinatra, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere kind of scenario. But also, I fundamentally really enjoy visiting and working in the US, and the scale of contract manufacturers is just, another order of magnitude bigger than what they would be here in New Zealand, for example. So I, through my experience with meat product development, had worked with contract manufacturing partners frequently, and I had a kind of checklist of what I was looking for in the ideal partner, and it was starting with that unique process and equipment, and someone who were, the people that, it sounds strange, but kind of love their equipment and want to coax interesting things out of it and take it beyond, maybe what the manufacturers recommend sometimes, or what convention recommends. So these guys in Texas were very much in that category. They looked at our cubes and they said, yeah, we think with our equipment, we're going to go away and talk to the manufacturer. We think we could customize a forming plate, like a die that will make the cubes really efficiently. And they were up for the challenge. So that was kind of box one ticked. And then they had the scale that we were looking for. They had the third-party audit standards that we were looking for that would open up potentially grocery category customers as well for us. And even though those types of human-grade third-party accreditations aren't that common in the pet space, they give me a lot of reassurance that when I'm sitting on the other side of the world, or I'm not in Texas, that I'm dealing with people who have a continuous improvement culture, who have a system for looking at the root cause of any kind of issue that you might have during production. So that was really reassuring, and also I often think it's not the worst thing if you have a problem quite early on. If you have a problem early on, you get this opportunity to kind of see how one another reacts, and in our case, we did strike some issues, and we were able to talk through them maturely and professionally. And these guys are professional meat people, and I like to think I am too. And we just logically worked our way through any issues that came up, and no one had to kind of lose their cool or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So those things just reassured us that we were with the right partner, and then their investment that they've made in freeze drying gives us the ability to take one raw material and turn it into 4 or 5 different products. And that is, from a marketing perspective, a much better situation where we can make those decisions around product mix. We separate our D2C and our retail SKUs so that we can price them discreetly. And the ability to pick how much we make of each is really helpful, at the, if you like, the last minute before the product enters the final supply chain.
We'll be right back.
Hey guys, I know you all want to grow on Amazon, so I'm so excited to tell you about our official Amazon agency partner, Daybreak. I think they are the best fit for emerging brands. Their retainer is less than half of what most agencies charge, and their team are total killers. I worked with them on my last brand because I'd heard such good things, and they absolutely crushed it. They'll get you started on Amazon or help you level up. First, they fix up your listing, they make your creative ads, they manage your operations and advertising, and can even help with channels like Instacart and Criteo. If you're interested, email them. It's startupcpg@daybreak.agency. It's also in the show notes. And make sure to mention Startup CPG for $600 of free design credits.
And now, back to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think those are all incredibly important things to consider as you're looking for a partner too, in any realm. Making sure you can communicate if a problem arises is so essential. And then the many other things you mentioned as well, obviously.
Yeah, and let's face it, problems are going to come up. And in our case, the forming plate that we developed together with our partner is 1/100th of an inch too large. And the implication of that is that the result is that the cubes are at the moment about 8% larger than they ought to be, which then starts to put strain on the packaging. And these are some of the challenges for us with working remotely. But visiting the factory each time you're able to improve those things and work closely with them, and having the that kind of open relationship, and that, hey, look, if we make this better at the front end, it's going to make everything easier for your staff when it comes to packing it, and everything's going to work more efficiently. So it's got to be a win-win situation where they end up with a more manufacturable product at the end of the day. Coming
Absolutely.
up with something that's a little too Willy Wonka in terms of how elaborate it is ultimately not going to do you any favors. It might sell well, but if you can't make it, reliably, then what's the point?
Absolutely. And just the 1/100th, that's a real, it just goes to show how these tiny little things can have a huge impact.
And it turned out to be the density of venison was different to beef. So this molding plate had been designed with beef, and then when we ran venison through it, we got a slightly different result.
That's so interesting.
When you reflect on it, it was like, well, our logic was sound. We tested it. Okay, next time we know we'd test it with the actual raw material.
Yes, totally. Everything's a lesson.
Exactly.
Speaking of lessons, though,
if
you were to be talking to another founder who's either considering entering the pet space or the meat space or the CPG space in general, and they were where you were, back in 2020, just tinkering with recipes, what's a lesson you've learned or a piece of advice you've gained over these last 4 years of running Huntaway that you would share with an early days founder?
Sure. I think for us, if we come back to that acquisition of new customers challenge, we probably dipped our toe in a bunch of different channels and efforts around customer acquisition rather than really testing one out, ruling it in or out, and then moving on. And the number of times we dialed up Facebook ads only to kind of get a wishy-washy result and then think, let's pause it and come back to it again in 6 months, when in reality we probably needed to really knuckle down and finish that learning and that development and say, yes, this is a channel for us, or no, it's not. And I regret some of the time we lost through not making those hard decisions and not being distracted by another opportunity. You can easily pick up a periodical or be looking at a website and think, I should give that marketing effort a try and try LinkedIn ads or something like that. And it could be that there is a time where you do that, but not before you've finished doing what you started. And I think that magpie approach of kind of like, there's another shiny object over here, I'm going to go over and try this. Resisting that temptation is something I wish I could have done better in the early stages of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that pretty much every founder I talk to talks about how challenging it is to understand and get a grip on these paid ads because everything is changing all of the time and it's hard to keep up. But I think that's great advice. So my final question is just, where can people learn more about Huntaway? Where can people purchase Huntaway and follow along the journey as you guys continue to grow?
Sure. So our socials, we're mostly active on Instagram and to some degree on TikTok as well, at Huntaway Wild. And the website is huntaway.pet, P-E-T. We'd encourage people to check us out there and see what they think and send us any questions that they might have. We like to think that we post some interesting, informative stuff just around general kind of dog health and advice on our socials. And we've got a really kind of vibrant community there, a really engaged community who, as I say, give us a lot of feedback about the product and how their dogs are doing.
I love it. Passionate dog owners, check them out. Or if you know some passionate dog owners, send them Huntaway's way.
We get a lot of people. We get a lot of people buying products for the dog in their life rather than their own dog. So, in particular, with the treats and chews that we make. Yeah,
I love that. Well, it was so much fun to learn more about Huntaway, Cam, and get to know you and what you guys are doing. And that's it for today.
Great talking to you, Grace. And we just really appreciate everything you guys do at Startup CPG. We really enjoy being part of the community and encourage people to really make the most of it.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, it would help us out so much if you left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I am Grace Kennedy, the editor for Startup CPG, so feel free to add me on LinkedIn or reach out to me on Slack. I'm always on the hunt for new and exciting brands to feature. And if you're a potential sponsor that would like to appear on the podcast, please email partnerships@startupcpg.com. And finally, as a reminder for anyone listening, if you haven't already, we would love for you to join our community on Slack, and you can sign up via our website, startupcpg.com.